If you're lying in bed in a warm, quiet room with the nightlight casting a pale gold on the wall, try to imagine you're living more than 800 years ago in medieval Europe. There was a time when darkness was truly dark, unbroken by electricity lamps or the restless tempo of the industrial age, and people slept differently than we do now. There were no clocks to point the hour, no neon to stretch the day a little longer. Night, then, was a sacred dominion where all living things withdrew from the visible world and returned to the slow breath of the earth and sky. Before the idea of 8 uninterrupted hours existed, medieval people lived by a biological rhythm we've since forgotten: segmented sleep. They called the first portion the first sleep and the second portion the second sleep. Between them was a hazy waking interval, a time when one stood half awake, half asleep, like standing on a threshold between two shores. That is where the story of sleep begins, when darkness ruled the world. In those days when the sun set, life fell silent. No one thought of staying up late. Light was a luxury. People had only candles, torches, and the flicker of the hearth. Each flame was a treasure guarded through the night, for if it died, the cold poured into the house like a hungry beast. Outside the village, roads bore no light at all. Every sound turned strange, the owl's call like a voice from another world, the wind scraping the thatch like a long, tired sigh. Medieval people didn't just live in darkness, they lived with it. And in that darkness they discovered something we moderns have lost. Their sleep was not continuous. Segmented sleep, a forgotten secret. Historians call it bimodal sleep or segmented sleep, the night divided into 2 parts. For centuries, that was how most of Europe slept. At dusk, they went to bed early often, around 8 or 9 o'clock. After 4 hours around midnight, they woke not from insomnia, but because their bodies were set that way. They didn't know the word melatonin, but they understood the night had 2 pulses, one for the first sleep, one for the second. That interval was called the watch, the night watch. And for an hour or 2 they rose and did all sorts of things: prayed, read scripture, wrote letters, visited a neighbor, or simply sat by the hearth and talked. Records from the 15th century show that waking at midnight was considered normal, even pleasant. A French physician, Laurent Joubert, wrote in Traité du Sommeil, "The first sleep soothes the body while the second sleep soothes the soul." The between time became private time, a quiet seam running through the fabric of the night. The midnight watch, when people spoke with the dark, what did they do between sleeps? Not switch on a phone to check the clock. They woke for real. Slowly. In the thick dark, they raked the coals, adjusted the embers, and listened to the wind, to the scratch of mice under the floor, to rafters groaning in a gust. Some prayed. The devout believed this was God's hour when the soul opened most easily. They murmured psalms or made confession to themselves. Farmers checked the byre. Had the cow calved were the hens? Astray were the doors barred tightly. The wife rekindled the fire, warmed water, and laid out dough for the morning. Some couples used this quiet to talk or to be intimate. A smith checked his forge. A baker began kneading because the temperature was perfect for yeast. Noble women took needle and thread in the hush. While the rest of the world slept, a small nighttime society moved in rhythm, as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world. Not only culture bodies themselves seemed born to sleep this way. For them, waking at midnight wasn't insomnia. It was part of life's cadence, a habit of nature, before artificial light tricked the human clock. Sleep and the body. Medieval people believed the body had its own rhythm and night was the time to restore. In the Book of Hours, a popular 15th century prayer book, there's a reminder: sleep when darkness falls that the body may rest and the soul may keep watch. No one counted to a full 8 hours. They didn't measure time, they listened to the body. The first sleep ran deeper, restoring strength after the day's labor. The second was lighter dream. Rich, sometimes seen as the hour when holy messages arrived. A farmer might recount his dream to the priest in the morning as if it were a letter from God. Dreams weren't mind games. They were doors to another world, where they slept and how. If you think bed means softness, you'll be surprised medieval beds were hardly comfortable. The poor slept on straw sacks, palliasse right on the floor. Straw was stuffed into cloth and changed monthly or seasonally, because after a while it molded stank and drew lice and bed bugs. If there was a coverlet, it was coarse wool or hides. They didn't change into night clothes. Men, women, and children kept on their day garments not from modesty but because of the cold. The wealthy had carved wooden beds, feather mattresses, and four-poster curtains. The curtains kept in warmth and kept out insects, rats, even the occasional chicken that flew inside. Beds appear in noble wills. The oak bed carved with a cross to my eldest son. A bed was property, not mere furniture. Some beds could be dismantled and moved from castle to castle, a badge of status. But rich or poor all knew a simple truth. A bed wasn't a nest of luxury. It was a way to survive the night. When night was a test of survival, picture a winter in 13th century England. Wind knives through the door seam. Walls are clay and straw. The hearth dies by midnight for lack of fuel. People curl under rough blankets and keep warm by lying close. Children sleep between parents. A dog or cat at the foot. Sometimes even a hen or piglet inside for heat. The sounds of the night wind rain beasts aren't romantic. They remind you that beyond the door, cold and hunger wait. And if you wake at midnight, you don't panic, you're used to it. Darkness is a companion, not an enemy. Shared space, the communal bed. There were no bedrooms in the modern sense. Families slept together, sometimes in the same bed, sometimes on blankets side by side. At inns, strangers shared beds too. A merchant might lie beside a farmhand or a pilgrim. First to bed took the inside. Latecomers slept at the edge. Privacy barely existed, and no one found that odd. Sleep was a communal act, like eating, like prayer. You felt safer hearing another's breath beside you. The world pauses between sleeps. Between the two sleeps, there was a peculiar hush. No machines, no ticking clocks, no electric light, only live embers and human breath. That was when the human mind fell into step with nature. Many said they woke without fear, even at peace. They stepped outside and looked up. The medieval night was crowded with stars, no sky glow to drown them. A Norman farmer once said, "Each night I wake and look at the sky. The stars shine like God's eyes. Then I know I still live." Perhaps that's what we've lost the ability to wake and be calm. Sleep across the classes. In towns, artisans kept the same rhythm. After long work, they ate, slept early, woke at midnight to write letters, plain wood or balance accounts by candlelight. Nobles read scripture, conversed, or sipped a little wine for warmth. Some read poetry. This was the hour no one intruded. For monks and nuns, the interval was obligatory prayer. They rose for matins, a rite dating to the 6th century. It was the hour when the soul's door stands open, the abbots said. When light came and segmented sleep faded. This two-stage habit lasted centuries, until artificial light appeared. With oil lamps, then gaslight, and finally electricity, people stayed up later. Days lengthened, nights shrank. The midnight watch thinned out. No one went to bed early enough to wake in the middle anymore. By the 19th century, 8 straight hours became the ideal. Waking at night was labeled insomnia, not nature. The body remembered the old rhythm. Society moved on. Segmented sleep, once a millennia-old norm, slipped from memory. Modern science and the return of the two sleeps. In the late 20th century, researchers tested it. Thomas Warr at the U.S. National Institute of Mental Health had volunteers live for 4 weeks with 14 hours of darkness daily. Soon, they naturally fell into 2 sleeps, 4 hours asleep, 1 to 2 hours awake, then back to sleep. Conclusion: segmented sleep is natural, not merely cultural but a biological response when artificial light is removed. Medieval people were not odd. They lived by the body's original clock. We, in a world lit 24/7, are the strangers tonight, understanding sleep, understanding ourselves. If you've ever woken at midnight and struggled to doze again, maybe nothing is wrong. Maybe your body is remembering something old, an ancestral memory, a survival pattern. Long ago, that interval was the safest time to take stock. Is the fire alive? Are the children warm? Is the soul at ease? Today, we glance at a clock and worry we haven't hit 8. They were poor, perhaps, but they knew something we forgot. Sleep isn't just rest. It is the remainder of life itself, where even in darkness we find a small light within. Night ends, but the old thing remains. When the rooster crowed and the first light slipped through the door, they rose not to an alarm, but to daylight's summons. They stretched, brushed straw from their clothes, and stirred the hearth. A new day began simple and quiet. They had slept twice, woken once, and still had strength for labor. No coffee, no digital schedules, only the sun, the world's one clock. And when the sun set, the cycle began again: first sleep, the watch; second sleep, and old music, steady and unhurried. In the 1990s, a team of researchers tried this again. Let people live for weeks without artificial light. Most naturally drifted back into the two-sleep pattern, just like the medievals. The body self-sorted as if a primordial program had never been erased. Perhaps our ancestors weren't sleep-deprived at all. Perhaps they understood sleep more deeply than we do. Indeed, traces of the two-sleep pattern appear throughout medieval sources, from tales like the Canterbury Tales, where characters rise at night to head out on errand or adventure, to manuals of household piety that recommend gentle reflective activities for this sacred interval. Some sources even say that what you think or discuss between sleeps bears special weight, because the mind in that hour is alert, relaxed, and rare. Physicians endorsed it, too. Waking at midnight aided digestion, cleared the spirit, and helped diagnose illness through dreams. One doctor noted that dreams from the first sleep could signal problems, while the interval between was perfect for pondering and interpreting them. He added mildly that one shouldn't practice swordplay too vigorously at that hour. Apparently some nights needed reminding. And the pattern wasn't only for monks or nobles. Archaeological evidence across Europe shows humble homes with night nooks, places to sit, work, or rest lightly in the between time. People used special rushlights, strips of rush pith dipped in fat, slow to burn and dim, but bright enough to read, write, or stitch. From commoners to aristocrats, everyone took part in the night's activity. A French noblewoman wrote in 1465, "Between my two sleeps, when the world is still dreaming, is when the soul is clearest for making verse." A merchant said he balanced his accounts then because his mind was unexpectedly cool and exact. In hospitals, nurses recorded that patients were most lucid between sleep's ideal for taking temperatures, noting symptoms, or giving medicines. Night duty began in the Middle Ages, not simply to ward off drowsiness, but to use this lucid state. They even had a name for it: the watching hour. During that hour, prayers were thought to be better heard, creativity flowed more easily, and conversation more readily touched truth. Superstition? Maybe. But modern sleep studies show that this interval is indeed a gentle wakefulness. Low stress, well suited to reflection, light tasks, or quiet connection. Perhaps the medievals stumbled upon a rough draft of mindfulness, away from haste, away from noise, entirely present in that midnight clarity. Many sources say people remembered this time vividly, as though it were the most special part of the day. If you're still awake after this journey, your mind may be hushed like those medieval souls by the fire, listening to the whisper of smoke and breath of the night. If this story made you smile, or made you think about how our ancestors lived, tap, like, so I know you're still with this channel, And if you want more of humanity's strange, luminous paths through the dark, please subscribe so we can light one more small candle together in the night. There are small things that to modern ears sound almost laughable. A sleeping cap, a shared bed, a stranger lying close beside you in an inn. But to medieval people, these things were not amusing at all. They were not strange habits. They were ways of surviving the long night. When the sun set, the world did not simply grow darker, it contracted. Light no longer spread outward. It withdrew, clinging to the space around a torch, a smoldering hearth, or a candle trembling in the draught. Beyond that fragile circle lay forests, mist, wild animals, and nameless roads. Inside the circle, human beings drew closer, wrapped in coarse cloth and body heat, and most importantly, in one another's presence. No one slept alone unless they had been cast out or were already dead. In the medieval world, sleeping alone was not a sign of freedom or privacy. It was a sign of danger. A solitary sleeper was vulnerable to theft, to animal attack, to death unnoticed. To die in the night without witnesses, without final prayers, was a genuine fear. Imagine this: you are a pilgrim walking the long road to Canterbury. You have spent the entire day trudging through mud and forest past scattered villages. Your shoes are heavy with water. Your clothes cling damp with sweat. Your body is so exhausted that every step feels like a negotiation with your own will. When darkness fully falls, you see a faint light ahead, a roadside inn. There is no bright sign. Only firelight slipping through the cracks of a wooden door. You knock. The innkeeper, a broad man smelling of smoke and ale, opens the door, looks you up and down, and nods. "Is there a place to sleep?" you ask. He smiles gently and points to the corner. The bed is there. There is no private room, no key, no choice. You approach the bed. Two men are already lying there. A soldier, his armor placed on the ground. A merchant, his money pouch hidden beneath his head. Both are asleep, breathing heavily, the smell of sweat mixed with damp wool. You do not feel afraid. You do not feel surprised. You simply nod, remove your shoes, pull your sleeping cap down, and climb in beside them. No one speaks. No introductions are made. Because the bed does not belong to individuals, the bed belongs to the night. Shared sleep. Co-sleeping was so common that no one questioned it. Families slept together, sometimes 4 or 5 to a bed. Children slept beside their parents not out of sentimentality, but because warmth was a matter of survival. Travelers shared beds with strangers. The elderly, the sick, the poor all occupied the same spaces. There was no notion of personal space as we understand it today. Not because medieval people lacked sensitivity, but because privacy was a luxury that did not yet exist. In monasteries, places seemingly removed from worldly life, sleep was even harsher. Monks did not sleep in individual beds, but in shared dormitories lying side by side like rows of gravestones. No blankets, no pillows, no speech. The rule of Saint Benedict clearly stated that monks must sleep fully clothed belts, fastened footwear nearby, ready to rise the instant the bell for matins rang in the middle of the night. Sleep was not for rest. Sleep was a controlled suspension. For monks, night was the most dangerous time. Not because of wild animals, but because of demons. Medieval theology held that night was when evil whispered, tempted, and entered through dreams. Dreams were not seen as unconscious imagery, but as spiritual gateways through which the soul could be invaded. To sleep too deeply was to abandon vigilance. To sleep too soundly was to open the door to sin, and so people slept little. They slept in fragments. They slept with carefully managed anxiety. The sleeping cap, something that makes modern listeners smile, was, in fact, a defensive layer. It kept the head warm, the place medieval belief considered most vulnerable to the cooling of the soul. Covering one's head in sleep was not about comfort. It was about preventing the loss of vital force during the night. Medieval people did not sleep to forget the world. They slept to endure it. The waking interval in the middle of the night, what we now call insomnia, was once entirely normal. People rose to pray, to whisper quietly, to check the fire, or simply to sit in stillness. No one rushed to fall back asleep. Night was not an enemy to conquer. It was something to live alongside. Only when artificial light grew stronger did sleep become compressed into a single uninterrupted block. Only when private rooms appeared did sleeping alone become the norm. And only then did shared sleep begin to seem strange. But to medieval people, sleeping together was logical. It was safe. It was human. One body lying beside another was proof that you had not been swallowed by the world, that you still belonged to a living circle, that if you did not wake, someone would know. Perhaps what makes modern people laugh is not that these customs were foolish, but that they remind us of a time when sleep was not a private act, but a communal one, a silent agreement among fragile human beings, helping one another endure the dark. In folk tradition, shared sleep was also seen as an act of humanity. Children slept beside their parents to stay warm. Servants slept near their masters to tend the fire. And sometimes the poor slept beside animals not only out of affection but for body heat. Dogs, cats, even small pigs were considered living blankets. They lay at the foot of the bed or beside a person breathing steadily. Some even believed that an animal's warmth could drive away spirits, for demons feared the scent of beasts. The medieval world was a world of touching bodies. There was no personal distance. The smell of sweat breath, snoring shifting bodies weaned, slipping through cracks, all blended into the night's music. Today, we call this inconvenient. But to them it was security. Sleeping with others meant sleeping within a community. Feeling another's warmth meant knowing you had not been abandoned in a cold world. And then there was one small curious object no one could do without the sleeping cap, the nightcap. Simple as it sounds, it was a symbol of an entire era. In stone houses without heating, the head lost heat fastest. A cap could save you from illness, even from death in your sleep. People wore nightcaps to keep the head and neck warm, and to cover hair-washing hair was a rare luxury, done only a few times a month. But the nightcap was not merely protection. It was social language, a marker of class. The poor wore linen caps, plain and hand-sewn. The wealthy wore silk, trimmed with fur or velvet, sometimes embroidered. Women's nightcaps had ties that fell softly down the neck, reminders of modesty. In old engravings, mothers are shown wearing caps as they sleep beside their children, symbols of virtue and order. If today we have elegant pajamas, medieval people had the night rail, a long, white sleeping garment, sometimes coarse, sometimes linen. It was not fashion, it was humility. No skin was to be exposed even in sleep, for it was believed that when you lay asleep, God was still watching. Folk tales speak of a woman who forgot her nightcap and had her soul blown away by the night wind. Superstition, perhaps, but in truth a symbolic explanation for cold pneumonia or sleeplessness caused by heat loss. Religion, medicine, and superstition merged. People explained the world through symbols. Among the nobility, sleep itself was part of ritualized power. They slept in private chambers, four-poster beds with heavy curtains and feather mattresses. When the lord retired, servants drew the curtains, folded blankets, and lit candles. Light symbolized grace. Servants often slept on the floor at the foot of the bed. In 15th century England, there was a word, bedfellow. It did not carry sexual meaning, but simply meant a person who shared a bed. A nobleman might sleep beside a male guest without scandal, a sign of trust and friendship. Interestingly, the concept of sleeping alone barely existed until the 17th century, when domestic architecture changed. Before that, space was communal. Families lived, ate, slept, and prayed in a single room. There were no children's bedrooms, no private master bedrooms. Night was shared. Privacy was rare. Sometimes this closeness bred small tragedies. Crowded inns and long journeys placed drunkards beside pilgrims, creating opportunities for theft and disease. Records tell of travelers waking to find the person beside them dead from cold or smallpox. Yet people continued to sleep together, for fear of loneliness outweighed fear of illness. Loneliness in medieval culture was associated with demons. A person sleeping alone might be pressed by spirits possessed or haunted. Shared sleep warmed not only the body, but the soul. In cities like London and Paris, public inns became spaces where all classes mixed. A single bed might hold 3, 4, even 5 people. They slept pressed together, wrapped in blankets, breathing beside strangers. And, strangely, no one complained. Because at night, when light was scarce, all ranks were equal. Cold did not distinguish between noble and peasant. And in sleep they returned to being creatures without titles, without status, only breath. The word nightcap gained another meaning from this custom. After lying down, people drank a small amount of strong liquor, brandy, mead, or ale to help them sleep. A nightcap drink. A simple ritual that endured for centuries and remains in modern English. During long nights, people did more than sleep. They dreamed, they told stories, they sang. Lullabies were born in these spaces, dark rooms, cold wind, and crying children. A mother sang to soothe her child, but also to soothe herself, to forget hunger, cold, and tomorrow's worries. Soft songs carried across generations, becoming the shared memory of a continent. Old texts contain lines such as, "We lay together for warmth and spoke of dreams until the cocks crowed." A simple sentence, yet it holds an entire world. A world where humans needed one another not only to live, but to sleep. In that closeness, medieval sleep was not rest, but a ritual of survival. They slept with caps, with clothes, with animals, with strangers, with distant church bells. They had no soft beds, no electric blankets, no recorded lullabies. But they had something we have lost: primitive human connection. Today, when we close doors, turn off lights, and sleep alone in silent rooms, we call it privacy. To medieval people, it would have felt like punishment. They lived in a world where another's warmth meant life, where a nightcap marked the boundary between cold and death, and where sleep cramped and humble remained a symbol of faith that when the sun set, humans needed one another to cross the dark. Perhaps, on some rainy night, if you feel alone, remember that your ancestors lived differently. They did not fear darkness. They did not fear another's breath beside them. They believed that when souls closed their eyes together, they entered an invisible sanctuary where life and sleep met, where faith rested in another's breathing. If you listen long enough, you might hear them. Still, the soft turning of bodies from the past whispers in the cold night, the rustle of cloth against a sleeping cap. Simple sounds, yet proof of something enduring. That in the dark, humanity has always found warmth not from fire but from one another. Before you fall asleep, leave me a comment. What do you think humanity lost when electric light erased the night? I would love to read your thoughts when morning comes. And don't forget to follow for the next stories where history whispers and sleep returns, shaped by knowledge and stillness. Night in the medieval world was not merely the span of time between 2 days. It was a door, a blurred boundary that people stepped through and sometimes did not return. When the sun went down, medieval people believed darkness belonged to God, and yet it was also the hour of the devil. Night was not simply the absence of light. It was a sacred and dangerous realm where the order of daylight was temporarily suspended, and the border between the visible and the invisible grew thin. Each soul entered the night as though entering another country, a place where faith and fear did not stand opposed, but clung tightly together like two faces of the same cross. By day, God dwelled in churches and ritual and law. By night, God was still there, but the devil was there too. And so, before sleep, everyone prayed. not out of habit but out of fear that when they closed their eyes, God might call them home. In the medieval imagination, sleep was not rest. It was a temporary death, a brief retreat from the world of the living in which the soul slipped away from the body and entered a realm no human could control. It is no accident that many texts of the time described sleep as emula mortis, an imitation of death. In the Book of Hours, the most widespread personal prayer book of the Middle Ages, the night prayers often began with the line, "In pace id ipsum dormiam et requiescam." In peace I will lie down and sleep. But that peace was never guaranteed. For behind cold stone walls, people believed darkness was alive, not as an abstract idea, but as something with intention. There were restless souls, unable to find release, wandering through rooms. There were demons lurking near the bed, waiting for consciousness to weaken. There was death, silent, unannounced, sitting in the corner, waiting for breath to thin. For centuries, the Church taught that night was a time of testing. Day belonged to order, night belonged to choice. Angels and demons both went on patrol. One side whispered lullabies of faith. The other planted crooked thoughts, temptation, despair, misdirection. Medieval people believed that if you died in your sleep without confessing in time, your soul would be lost between two worlds, not pure enough for heaven, not sinful enough for hell, a suspended state more frightening than punishment itself. And so each evening, before lying down, they begged for forgiveness. They confessed. They recited prayers, sometimes long passages repeated again and again, until the eyelids grew heavy, not to fall asleep more easily, but so that if morning never came, the soul would still know the way back. For children, that fear was softened by lullabies and gentler images. A mother would place her hand on her child's forehead and whisper, "Angel of God, my guardian dear, watch me through this night." The child believed an angel stood guard. But the mother knew and feared that demons did not sleep either. People believed the devil could slip into dreams, wearing the face of loved ones appearing as sweet promises, and drag the soul away while the body lay still. Dreams, therefore, were never innocent. That fear was not mere superstition. It grew from brutal reality. Plague could erase an entire family in a handful of nights. War could turn villages to ash. Famine could make people die in their sleep from exhaustion. Death was not an abstract concept. It slept beside the living. And so medieval people regarded dreams as the language of God, not every dream, but the ones that left a person shaken. Such dreams were recorded, examined, interpreted. Monks compiled dream books, the most famous being the Somnial Danielis, based on the Book of Daniel, where each image in a dream carried sacred meaning. To dream of fire might be God warning of sin. To dream of water was a sign of cleansing. To dream of serpents, the devil was near. Dreams, which were in truth the mind's own creations, became religious evidence. And like any evidence, they could be used for judgment. A wrong dream could be taken as proof of a misdirected soul. In monasteries, dreams were not merely private experiences. They were a matter of discipline. Monks were required to report to the abbot if they dreamed anything unusual, women the body desire. All of it was considered temptation of the flesh. Some were punished with days of fasting. Some were forced to pray through the night without sleep in order to wash the dream away. Dreams ceased to be refuge. They became a monitored space. Even with eyes closed, they were still seen. Even in dreams, God was present. For that reason, medieval people never fully surrendered in sleep. They slept with vigilance. They slept with prayer. They slept in a state suspended between belief and dread. Night for them was not the end of a day. It was another test. And perhaps the hardest thing for us to understand today is not their fear, but the fact that they accepted living with it. They did not try to erase the darkness. They tried to pass through it with faith, with ritual, with whispered prayers before sleep. When the sun went down, medieval people did not say good night. They said farewell to the day, to the world, and perhaps to life itself. And in that moment, as the candle burned low, as breathing slowed, as darkness filled the cold stone room, sleep was no longer physiology. It became theology. Outside the monastery walls, folk belief offered another understanding. Less systematic, less doctrinal, yet sometimes sharper, more grounded in lived experience. They did not call night the devil's hour in the church's official language. They called it the time when worlds met. Not because they loved darkness, but because they had lived long enough to learn that when light disappears, everything daylight conceals begins to show. In folk imagination, night was like a thin curtain. By day, the curtain was thick. People worked the fields, went to market, argued, married, buried their dead, all within order. But when the sun went down, the curtain thinned. And the other side, whether the souls of the dead, strange beings, or simply human fear itself, began to seep through. They believed the spirits of the dead wandered across the fields. Not the dead who had been properly buried with prayers and farewell rites, but those who died suddenly died in plague, died on the road, died unnamed, or died without a final word. Those souls, folk people said, were not at rest. They could not find the way. And so night became their road. In the flatlands, people said that if you crossed a field late at night, you might hear footsteps that left no prints. Not someone truly walking behind you, but grass pressed down then springing back. A very faint rhythm, as though something unseen were crossing the path you had just taken. In forests, they believed darkness held what daylight could not contain. A forest had no walls, no clear boundaries. All directions looked the same, and if you lost your way, once night could turn being lost on the road into being lost in life. And so, in stories passed from mouth to mouth across Europe, night became a map of omens. The cry of an owl signaled that someone would soon die. Not because the owl called death, but because its sound rose at the moment everything else was silent. It was sudden. It was cold. It felt like a question no one could answer. People heard an owl cry 3 times and told themselves, something is coming. And in an age when death arrived as quickly as a change in wind, something is coming was almost always true. As for the flickering lights in woods and marshes, what modern people call a natural phenomenon, folk belief called them will-o'-the-wisps, the lanterns of wandering spirits. A light held by no hand. An invitation with no voice. A sign meant for the weary, the greedy, or the guilty. It did not shine brightly. It was not clear. It simply blinked as if it knew you were watching. You took 1 step, it retreated 1 step. You turned left, it turned left. And when you finally understood your feet had sunk into mud, water had risen to your ankles, and the path behind you was gone. People said the will-o'-the-wisp does not kill you. It does something crueler. It lets you wander until you collapse. These tales may smell of illusion. But set them in their world, a Europe without streetlights, without reliable maps, without rescue, and you will understand sometimes spirit lights were simply a poetic name for dying of being lost. And then there were stories like thin knife cuts light, but slicing deep into a community's memory. A man loses his way at night and meets a girl in white who beckons him. She stands beneath a tree, hair long, voice soft as wind through grass. She does not ask his name. She only says, "Come with me. This road is safe." The man is tired. He has gone too far. His feet ache, his mind is empty. He follows. At dawn, they find him in a graveyard or along the edge of a field, face down, his hand still gripping grass. The girl in white is gone. All that remains is daylight, silence, a silence colder than night, because it exposes. Such a story is told and retold across villages and generations, each place adding a detail. But the core never changes. Night offers invitations, and if you trust them, you do not return. A woman hears 3 knocks at the door. Not ordinary knocks, not hurried, not loud. 3 even beats, as if someone were counting. "Who is it?" she asks. No answer. She opens the door. No one stands there, only wind. The next morning, her husband falls from his horse, or a child burns with fever, or a neighbor dies suddenly. And from that day on, 3 knocks become a sign. Not because they cause tragedy, but because in an uncertain world, people need something to fasten randomness onto a pattern. Fear without shape is endless fear. But once fear has a shape, 3 knocks, an owl's cry, a ghost light, it becomes something you can avoid, describe, and teach to children. So folk culture built its own night map signs to recognize danger, taboos to preserve life, small rituals to feel not entirely powerless. People avoided crossroads at midnight, for where roads cross, they believed worlds cross as well, and you could step into the wrong reality without knowing it. They avoided whistling at night. That sound, they said, called what should not be called. And even if you did not believe, you did not whistle, because if you were wrong, the cost was too high. They placed a pinch of salt near the windowsill, hung a dried branch above the door, put a closed pair of scissors beneath the pillow as a sign of shutting the invisible doorway of dreams. It sounds like superstition, but in truth it was survival psychology wrapped in symbol. In an age with no antibiotics, no emergency medicine, no streetlights, people needed small mental buttons so they could sleep. Otherwise, they would stay awake forever. And within that night map lay a territory both frightening and familiar dreams. Folk people did not analyze dreams like monks did. They told dreams as though telling of a journey. I dreamed of water. I dreamed my teeth fell out. I dreamed someone called my name. These dreams were shared early in the morning in the kitchen when the fire had just been lit, not for scholarship, but to ask, is it an omen? In every village there was someone who knew. An old woman who had lived long, a woman who had survived many plague seasons, an old man who had been a soldier and buried friends. They listened and nodded, "Be careful," or shook their heads. "It's nothing." And in that way, dreams became part of communal life. Another way to speak of fears people could not say directly. Yet there were also nights when folk people were not afraid of worlds meeting. Nights when they believed the sky was nearer, because amid all those phantoms there was still the light of faith. Medieval people believed that praying in the middle of the night brought them closest to God because the world was silent then, and only the heart and breath remained. Daytime prayer was often mixed with noise markets, arguments, labor. But nighttime prayer was the soul speaking when there was no audience. Some people woke in the night not from fear, but from habit, and knelt beside the bed. No church was needed, no great candles, only a slow breath, a single prayer, and the feeling that in the darkness there was a gentle gaze listening. In that moment, night was no longer a trap. It became a vast room in which humans could confess fatigue, confess helplessness, confess small sins, a harsh word, a jealous thought, a selfish act, and sometimes confess nameless fears, fear that morning will not come, fear of losing loved ones, fear of not being strong enough. Night then was not the devil's territory. Night was the territory of truth. And in folk stories, one image repeats again and again, a small candle in the corner of the room, not bright enough to drive out all darkness, but bright enough to remind you that you have not fully belonged to it. Sometimes that candle was lit not for convenience, but for symbol. Light, even weak light, was a declaration a human being can still place a small dot upon the vast night. And so folk night had 2 layers. One layer of fear, wandering souls, owls, ghost lights, knocks at the door, invitations. And one layer of faith, prayers, signs of the cross, whispers, endurance. The 2 were not contradictory. They completed each other like 2 hands clasping. Perhaps the deepest truth in the folk view of night is not whether they believed in will-o'-the-wisps. It is this: they never entered the night empty. They entered with stories, with signs, with prayers, with a community willing to believe that if you survived the night, it was not only luck, but some kind of shelter, whether you called it God or simply grace. In the Rule of St. Benedict there is a line, "Let them rise at the 8th hour of the night to praise the Lord." When the bell for matin sounded, monks knelt in darkness and lifted their voices in chant, their sound blending with the night's damp air. That sound solemn and pure was the heart of medieval night. Sleep, faith, and fear became one. In every house, every monastery, every roadside shelter, people did not merely sleep, they prepared for judgment. Because night was not time to rest, but a test of the soul. People believed Satan was strongest after midnight. That was the witching hour, the hour of witches and demons. If you woke, then do not look out the window, for sometimes something might be looking back. In 14th century Europe, as the Black Death swept through night, became even more terrifying. Survivors said they heard groans in their dreams, and by morning an entire household was dead. People lit candles around the bed so darkness would not flood in. Some families kept a Bible under the pillow, or fastened an iron cross at the door, believing sacred light could drive away the demons of disease. Night then was heavy as the breath of death itself, and yet it was also when faith burned brightest. People knelt beside the bed and pleaded, "Kyrie eleison, Lord, have mercy," for only mercy could carry them to morning. In the medieval imagination, there was no clear border between reality and the spirit world. Darkness was a thin curtain, and sleep was a door left ajar. Through that opening, anything could enter: angels, demons, memory, or the deepest fear inside a human heart. Night was when sin was exposed, even if no one saw. When people heard their conscience more clearly than any church bell. And that perhaps is why they feared night, not because it was dark, but because in darkness you cannot hide from yourself. And yet, within that fear, there was a strange beauty. Medieval night was not only time for terror, it was time for contemplation. For souls, waking in the third watch, lighting a candle, reading psalms, and asking, "Does God still remember me?" People believed that by praying through the night they helped keep the world from collapsing. A monk wrote in a journal in 1312, "If no man prays at night, the sun will not rise." That was faith beautiful and trembling. Today, we look back and call it superstition. But consider in a world without modern science, without electricity, without the certainty of tomorrow, that faith was how people preserved sanity. Faith was the candle. Fear was the wind. Both were needed to make the flickering light of history. When night passed, and the bell for lauds rang to announce dawn, medieval people opened their eyes with the feeling of being brought back to life. Each morning was a rebirth. Each night was a crossing. They did not need philosophy to understand how fragile life was. They only had to look at a candle burned down to nothing and know that one more day had been granted, that their soul still remained. If you listen long enough, you will begin to hear the miracle for centuries, when humanity still feared the dark. It was that very fear that pushed them to create civilization. From prayers in the night came sacred chant. From nightmares came carvings of heaven and hell. From the longing to be protected came churches with vaults rising toward the sky. Night gave birth to faith, and faith in its own way kept humanity from dissolving into darkness. When we look back, we understand medieval people were not foolish. They simply lived in a world where darkness was real. They believed because belief was the only way to sleep in peace. And perhaps deep down, we today, surrounded by electric light and noise, are still searching for the same thing, a reason to believe a prayer strong enough to lull ourselves. Medieval night, then, is not only the darkness of the past. It is a mirror held up to the present. We still wake in the middle of the night restless with worry, guilt, fear of the future, only now we no longer pray. We call it insomnia. They called it the hour of the soul. In the darkness of that century, people found God, found fear, and sometimes found themselves. Because between the church bell and the human heartbeat, one thing remains unchanged: When night comes, everyone needs a reason to believe they will wake again. There were nights so cold that even the fire seemed to shiver. The candle shrank in the draught. Ashes in the hearth cooled faster than expected. And warmth, the most fragile thing of all, became the boundary between life and death. On nights like these, medieval people did not sleep alone. They slept with nature itself. In the depths of a medieval winter, when frost whitened thatched roofs and breath turned into smoke in the darkness, the boundary between humans and animals slowly dissolved. Not in essence, but in the need to survive. Both trembled. Both sought warmth. Both pressed close to endure the long night. Peasant houses of the time had no concept of insulation. No private bedrooms, no enclosed hearths for individual rooms. Ceilings were low to trap heat. Walls were packed with earth mixed with straw. Floors were dried mud strewn with straw or rough planks. And all of life eating, working, praying, sleeping unfolded within a single room. Within that room, the family did not live alone. The pig slept in the corner, large-bodied, breathing, steadily radiating dependable warmth. The dog lay near the door, guarding the house and serving as a living heater. Chickens perched on the beams above high-dry safe from dampness and predators. When night fell, everything grew quiet. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of living beings conserving energy in order to survive. Only breathing remained. Human breath blending with animal breath. Slow, steady, warm. That sound for medieval people was almost the most primal prayer of life itself. Animals in that world were not merely property or tools of labor. They were allies in the struggle against the cold. A mother might hold her child in her right arm and a cat in her left. A man might let a dog curl at his feet like a living blanket. An old man might sit beside the pigsty on the coldest night because the animal's body heat kept him from freezing to death. People believed that the warmth of living creatures was a gift from God, not accidental, not coincidental, but part of the order of creation where species relied on one another when they were weakest. A proverb from the 14th century said, "Better a beast in bed than frost in the bones." The saying was not meant humorously. It was a truth of survival. And so, in winter nights, humans and animals, normally separated by natural hierarchy, social order, and custom, lay beside one another equal in their need to stay alive. No one was lowered. No one was offended. Only two species working together to keep breath going. In rural regions of France and England, there was even a custom known as bed companion beasts. Animals were chosen not for their economic value, but for their gentleness and ability to retain warmth. Small dogs, cats, rabbits, even lambs were brought indoors during deep freezes. Not as pets in the modern sense, but as mobile sources of heat. Among the nobility, the practice took on a different form, more refined, but rooted in the same need. Many families kept small dogs such as spaniels or Pomeranians, not for hunting but for sleeping together. These animals were called lap dogs. Dogs meant to rest on the lap or curl inside blankets. They were not merely symbols of status. They symbolized affection, trust, and warmth. In paintings by Jan van Eyck or Hans Holbein, the image of a small dog lying at the foot of the bed appears again and again. Not as a decorative detail, but as a familiar sign of private life, the place where people rested, where they were most vulnerable, and where they allowed another living being to remain close. In medieval winter nights, warmth was not a given. It was a scarce resource. And so, sleeping beside animals was not a strange habit. It was logic. It was knowledge accumulated across generations. It was an acceptance that humans did not stand outside nature but within it. When the fire died down, when wind slipped through the cracks, when darkness pressed against the roof, people did not resist the night through isolation. They resisted it through closeness, one body pressed against another, one breath mingling with another. a small circle of life in the heart of a harsh winter. And within that circle, medieval people learned something the modern world has slowly forgotten, that sometimes to survive the night what matters most is not separating oneself from nature but sleeping with it. For the poor, these sleeping companions were sheer survival. When wind sifted through the thatch and dew gathered on straw blankets, people drew. The pick close touched its thick bristles and felt heat flood their hands. It wasn't love, it was life. Medieval people had a very concrete sense of night. Night was not an interval, but the time of the body. They believed blood ran slower, the breath grew heavier, and the soul more easily lost. Night was when the body was weakest yet, when the earth stood nearest to heaven. Thus, many dared not lie flat. They slept sitting or half reclined, half slumped. The rich had velvet-upholstered wooden chairs. The poor leaned on a wall or post. Why? Because lying flat like a corpse might cause God to mistake you for one. In monasteries and ascetic orders, sleeping upright became a discipline of the soul. Benedictines and Cistercians called it the night of humility. To sleep sitting meant being always ready to pray, no indulgence, no surrender to the flesh. At Saint Denis, one monk recorded in the Chronicle, "We slept upon our knees that our souls might never lie down before the Lord." Sleep for them was a sacred duty, a self-examination. Do not sleep too deeply, lest you forget the faith. Outside the monastery, sleep was full of hardship. The sick, the hungry, the war-worn, they did not sleep. They collapsed. In the dark, disease slipped into houses like smoke, invisible, terrible. Plague, leprosy, ague, consumption, influenza, each arrived with the cold. No one knew the causes. They only saw that those who slept near the sick often never woke. So, in many villages, the sick bed was dragged to the porch or set by the fire. Not to cure, but to make the soul's passing easier. The night was full of strange sounds, dry coughing, labored, breathing the heave of retching. And in the small room, a mother prayed, "Lord, let him wake with the dawn." But morning came and only silence remained. Death moved as lightly as mist. No one heard it, no one saw it, but everyone felt it. Alongside disease were small, ruthless creatures, lice nits, fleas, bedbugs. They slipped everywhere, blankets, pillows, straw hareskin. Even nobles on feather mattresses were bitten night after night. People fought back with herbs scents of lavender, rosemary, and thyme were treated as amulets. Wood ash, bay leaves, or garlic oil were scattered about the bed. No one knew if it truly worked, but it was the only faith they had against an unseen misery. A 15th century note reads, "No man sleeps alone, for the vermin keep him company," a line both wry and sorrowful. When the last light retreated from field and hedge, they pulled the heavy wooden door, dropped the bar, and let the dark pour into the house. There were no electric lamps or glazed windows, only embers banked under ash, a tallow candle, and the familiar smoke threading every fiber. For a very long time, people and night had traveled together long enough for them to learn the little tricks of survival in the dark. How to sleep, how to warm, how to keep at bay the small stubborn things, mosquitoes, beetles, bedbugs, and fear itself, and fear. They began with the simplest rule: don't lie on the ground. Elders told the young the ground is low damp and the highway of all creeping things. Anything that crawls burrows settles, or lands from beetles to ants, from spiders to mosquitoes, favored the ground layer where air is still cold and wet. So even in poverty, they tried to find a raised plane logs rolled into a corner as props, scavenged boards leveled across. If wood was scarce, stones stacked and mud packed to make a low platform. No finery, just a handspan a hand and a half above the floor. That thin border kept them clear of the damp zone where insects swarmed. On the platform, they spread dry straw or hay, thick bundles tied with hemp, changed regularly to avoid mold. Straw was their mattress, not soft like down, but springy warm-keeping, and crucially a maze of fibers that slowed tiny pests. In harvest time, the straw still smelled of sun. In winter, old straw was smoked to lift the must. Over it, they laid coarse cloth old sack or patched linen. For a pillow, a rolled garment. Rarely a true cushion. But a bed was never for one. Shared sleep was habit and strategy. Adults lay on the edges as windbreaks, children in the middle where it was warmest. A servant stretched along the footboard to mind the fire. A wayfarer took the outer edge, both courteous and ready to rise if needed. In crowded homes, they built one large platform instead of splitting scant timber into many frames, a single surface for the whole family, saving wood and pooling warmth into an island of heat. When the wool blanket came up, breaths blended, and the chill of earthen walls stayed outside the rim. In windy districts, they invented box beds, wooden alcoves closed on one or two sides like an opened chest. Elsewhere, they hung coarse curtains to baffle drafts and dust. The cloth could not exclude all insects, but it slowed them, and more importantly spared sleepers' noses, the raw smell of damp plaster. In houses with lofts, older children sometimes climbed to the half-story. Half a body higher meant a different stratum of air, less damp, fewer insects warmer from rising hearth heat. Animals were part of the equation. Dogs at the foot, cats curled in straw. Sometimes piglets or lambs were brought indoors on biting nights. Not just friends breathing stoves. In the quiet, you could hear a dog's wet nose snuffle a cat's purr and feel yourself settle. Children, quick to chill, hugged the dog or rested heels on a lamb's hot back. The elderly set a cat over the belly like a living warm stone. Yes, beasts brought fleas too. In return, they warned of odd noises. In a place where everything was borrowed, a few bites was a price paid for a night's peace. And mosquitoes, those winged vexations, they had smoke. Not the tidy wisps of scouts, but thick, stinging smoke clinging to hair and cloth, yet driving back the blood-hungry wings. In the afternoon, as stew simmered, they fed the hearth with damp wood. Wet leaves dried moss so the fire smoldered and exhaled cushions of white smoke. At night, if mosquitoes thickened, they moved the embers chalked in moist fuel to heave up smoke. Vents were set windward, so the plume crept across the bed like a thin quilt. A smoky house made newcomers cough, but the household was used to it. Smoke saved the sleep. They also knew which scents offended insects. Mugwort, bitter sharp, juniper resinous, pricking. Rosemary, bitingly aromatic, went onto the coals to yield herbal smoke. Some hung bundles of mugwort on the rafters, burned juniper on damp nights, or smeared garlic around the platform. Not perfect, but fewer mosquitoes, fewer crawlers, and the human nose drifted from the mold smell. Later, scholars would call this fumigation. To them, it was simply habit. Smoke wasn't alone. They managed wind. A board to block the ingust, a slit to lead it out. Smoke flowed over the bed, air stirred. Mosquitoes hate eddies. If the night was too still, a straw fan wagged whenever the pot boiled, pushing the plume across the sleepers a few beats. Thatch isn't as tight as tile. Smoke wicked through the dry grass, leaving brown scent on morning hands, but fewer welts. They kept walls from becoming insect nests by patching daub plastering lime at the season's start. Lime kills odor and fills fissures where pests hide. Floors were strewn with fresh straw and sweet leaves, sweet vernal wild mint each season. Old straw was hauled out, sunned, burned, or composted. Everything turned with the wheel of the year. Cleanliness was rhythm, not campaign. They knew the hours of insects. After rain, humid nights brought mosquitoes early. On dry, gusty nights, they came late or thin. Children were told not to slap the air, but to pull the blanket over an ear. Adults shook smoke into the covers before sliding in. dense wool stymied wings, though bites still found the collar if not drawn tight. Hence, nightcaps stayed on in bed, covering brow, ears, and nape, a small bridge between warmth and safety. In heat, they moved their sleep. If the ash bank held too much heat, adults dragged straw near the door for a draft. Some set a low platform on the threshold, neither inside nor out, cool, yet still within the smoke's reach. Along rivers where mosquitoes swarmed, they hung coarse cloth like a net heavy tightweave, smacking of smoke, unpleasant but less bitten. It wasn't just technique, it was organization. Before bed tasks were divided, elders banked coals, adults braced the boards, children dropped dry leaves onto embers. If the wind shifted and smoke backed up, they pivoted. The platform turned the sleeping direction like swinging a skiff before a squall. Many platforms were only planks, on blocks easy to slide. Some homes had a fixed alcove for still nights and a movable bed for the seasons. They didn't need fine joinery, they needed resourcefulness. Still, sleep was not always gentle. Some nights bedbugs came out of cracks. Some nights mice found the crumb. Some nights mosquitoes beat the smoke. Then they told stories to hush a crying child and sang lullabies to calm themselves, simple songs of harvest of God of a sea they'd never see. The singing bridged that fragile seam between fatigue and sleep. Sometimes they changed houses not by leaving the village but by moving the sleeping place with the season, winter away from drafts near the hearth, summer away from heat near the door. Herbs hung from beams, onion and garlic skins scattered on the floor. A half-burned juniper bough wedged in the corner, resin still sweet. Small things stitched into a map of night. They gave thanks for what few praised smoke. It stung their eyes, clung to their hair, and dwelt in their clothes, yet it kept the mosquitoes off and warmed the stories. Smoke was a soft wall between them and the insects, between damp ground and warm straw. Centuries later, people measured and wrote papers that smoke significantly reduces bites, but here they only knew there were fewer red marks in the morning. Their art lay in enough high enough to clear the ground, smoke enough to vex the wings, warm enough to sleep, close enough to feel safe. They did not seek a soft bed. They sought a living bed. A rough plank, a thick sheaf of straw, an old dog, a nightcap pulled over the ears, a ribbon of smoke gliding through the curtain together. These made the technology of the night. At dawn, light tapped the door seam. They rose, brushed straw from their clothes, thumped the board to drop the bugs, and lifted the curtain to let the smoke loose. The platform became bench, straw a seat, and the coals the morning's pot. Night drew back into the cracks, waiting to spread its small lessons again. When we speak of them, we often think of lack, no soft beds, insect bites, scant light. But we might also see their gentle cunning. They lifted the body off the earth, shaped the wind, smoked the air, made friends with cats and dogs, and shared a blanket until the household became one large animal that knew how to keep itself warm. They lived in a world where everything was borrowed: straw from the season, smoke from the wood, warmth from one another, and thus sleep was never solitary. Night in that village arrived as always, yet never quite the same. The wind turned, the smoke shifted. The cat chose a new hollow. The child who cried yesterday slept soundly tonight. On the old wooden platform, bodies joined like timbers to make a boat. It never left the house, but each night it crossed rivers of insects, gutters of damp corridors of draft, and landed at dawn with smudges of ash on hands, fewer bites on skin, more warmth in the chest. There, sleep was art, science, and kinship at once. And when another night came, they set boards, heaped straw, coaxed smoke, and patted the old dog motions repeated until even tired eyes turned them into a lullaby. For a medieval woman, night was the hour of worry. She half slept while listening to her child breathe, waiting for her husband from the fields, fearing the tacksman's knock. Every sound in the night could be misfortune. They prayed and they kept watch. Their sleep was a half-wakefulness, a survival habit handed down for generations. Even so, amid hardship, people still found small tenderness. A frail child wrapped under the blanket with a dog, and by morning it lived. A fevered man with his wife rubbing his hands with warm water from the ash pot, and the fever eased. In a night full of danger, such small acts were the miracles. There were no drugs, no hospitals, no promises from physicians. There was only love, the one force strong enough to keep someone from dying. In that severity, medieval sleep became one of history's most human rites. All creatures sought warmth, all people sought faith. No hard line separated beast and man, sacred and profane, soul and body. All huddled under one roof and waited for the sun. When dawn broke, the first light fell across the faces that had crossed the night. The dog stretched, the child stirred. The mother opened her eyes. No one spoke. But in that silence was the exhale of life. And as they kindled a new fire, they did not know they had done the holiest thing people can do, survive together. Later, historians would call the Middle Ages a dark age. But if you look closely in that very darkness, there glows the gentlest light, the light of human kindness. Not dazzling like a cathedral, not ringing like a mass bell, but banked low in each night, each shared warmth, each touch of hands. It is a light that does not go out because it does not come from flame. It comes from the hearts of those who feared the night, but passed through it anyway, believing that if they held one another tightly enough, morning would find its way back. Looking back on those nights, we understand human evolution is not only technology, but kindness tempered by cold. We no longer sleep with animals, no longer crouch by an ash bank hearth. Yet, deep down, we still carry the memory of that warmth, the memory of nights when survival meant sharing. If you listen hard in the silence of the modern night, you can still hear a faint echo, the rustle of straw, a cat burrowing into someone's arms, a soft, human cough. Sounds that no longer belong to the present, but to humanity's collective memory. They remind us that before science, before medicine, before electricity and light, people learned to save each other with the simplest things, a breath and embrace, and a shared sleep. When night fell, and the last flame dwindled like a final testament, medieval people did not simply retreat into sleep as a biological act. They crossed a threshold, a fragile boundary where the body remained on a cold wooden bed while the soul was loosened from the control of conscious will. Sleep in that world was not complete rest, it was a trial. Sleep was considered the privilege of the living, yet in the night that privilege could become a trap. For when the eyes closed, the world did not disappear, it changed its form. Medieval people believed that sleeping peacefully through the night without disturbing dreams was a gift from God. But waking in the middle of the night, kneeling, lighting a candle, and reciting prayers, that was the proper ritual. If someone slept straight through without waking, without praying, without sensing the passage of time, their soul could lose its way. And if a person awoke between two sleeps without lighting a candle, without making the sign of the cross, without uttering a prayer, then the church bells echoing from afar, cutting through fog and cold wind, sounded like a terrifying reminder. I am watching you. In damp stone houses, where walls seeped moisture and thatched roofs leaked night was never truly silent. Wind scraped through door cracks like fingernails on wood. Ashes in the hearth crackled, sounding like tiny footsteps. Far away, dogs howled, whether a warning or a summons was unclear. Those lying in bed heard everything, yet could not tell what was real and what belonged to the night. Church bells from neighboring villages drifted through the mist, each toll measuring time not in hours, but in souls. Some awoke in the third watch of the night hearts, racing cold sweat soaking their backs. They tried to inhale and realized they could not. Their chests felt crushed beneath stone. Breath came short, broken. The body lay immobile, though the mind remained awake. And then the sensation arrived, one known for centuries before science had words for it, an invisible hand pressing upon the chest. Not a cough, not ordinary illness, but a presence. Medieval people called it Mara or Mare, an evil spirit of the night sitting upon the sleeper's body, draining breath, crushing the lungs, leaving the victim unable to cry out. In folk accounts, the Mara did not growl, it was silent. It did not strike, it pressed. Some said the Mara took the shape of a long-haired woman. Others claimed it was only a shadow. Some saw nothing at all. They only knew that something was there in the room, in the darkness, close enough to feel its cold. The most terrifying part was not pain, but loss of control. The mouth wanted to pray, but the tongue would not move. The hand wanted to make the sign of the cross, but the arm felt held fast. And in that moment, people believed that without God, no one could save them. When the oppression passed, they would bolt upright, gasping, as if returned from another realm. Some knelt at once. Some lit a candle, though the flame was weak and their hands shook. Some woke the entire household not to explain, but to confirm that they were still in this world. In many villages, people passed down ways to ward off the Mara, placing a knife beneath the pillow blade outward to cut the darkness. Hanging a thorny branch above the door so demons could not cross. Placing a Bible close to the chest to anchor the soul. These measures may sound superstitious, but for medieval people they were techniques of survival. For night was not merely time. It was a space of trial where humans confronted what daylight concealed: the fragility of the body, the helplessness of will, and the fear that a single moment of inattention could allow the soul to be taken. And so sleep was never entirely unconscious. It always came with prayer, with candlelight, with the awareness that waking in the morning was not guaranteed. For medieval people, every awakening after a long night was a return, and every visit from the Mara was a reminder that in the darkness, humans were never truly alone, but never entirely safe either. Chronicles and monastic books record that the man awoke unable to speak, his hands shaking. He called upon the name of the Lord, but could not hear his own voice, and at dawn he breathed his last. They did not call it a mere nightmare, but a nocturnal visitation of the devil. One scholar notes night terrors of various sorts appear often in medieval sources and allow us to delve into the dark corners of social, religious, and political life. University College, London. And so, medieval people devised rites, placing a small knife beneath the pillow, even setting their shoes by the bed, with laces trailing into the dark so the Mara would be caught. Atlas Obscura. The church bell, which could sound like a death knell, traveled farther by night while all slept, not only to mark the hours of prayer, but to remind the soul, I still stand guard. In the old monasteries, monks rose when the bell for matins rang, while the world lay steeped in shadow, and stood in the chapel torches in hand, chanting Te lucis ante terminum. They knew that without bells and song, darkness would swallow the soul. Those hymns rang down cold stone corridors like twin blades touching the night. Yet the true danger came not only from the outer dark, but from the dark within. One who woke between first sleep and second sleep in that half-sleep, half-dream might be drawn into sleepwalking, wandering the passages, forgetting they had left the bed. To the people of that time, sleepwalking was no harmless sleep function, but a sign the soul had stepped out of the body. If at dawn they found the wanderer and he remembered nothing, the village might say a night witch had entered him, or that he had bargained with spirits. Even in witch trials, many testimonies claimed I was dragged from bed. Each night spoke with the darkness, climbed trees, flew across the river, words then taken as evidence of demonic compulsion. Science had not yet parsed sleep paralysis, somnambulism, or disorders of sleep, so the uncanny was read through angels and devils. A person sleeping alone at midnight in a room lit by a single candle was not always at rest. There he lay ears catching the wind's hiss, the scuttle of insects beneath the floor, his own breath louder than usual. He might see a figure by the doorframe, eyes open or closed, because the borderland between dream and waking had thinned. In archival glosses, one still finds the terms mara mare Anglo-Saxon names for the memory of a sleep-pressing demon. In the village, if a bell sounded at night with no ringer, people said it was a ghost bell, foretelling a death or a coming upheaval. A church officer waking when the bell fell silent, though no one had pulled. The rope shuddered and wrote in the register, "No man to ring at dawn, someone has died in the parish." The living feared bells more than beasts' cries, for the bell was God's face turned toward them, announcing that a soul hung by a thread that night. Yet the night was not only the tinder of fear, it was a mirror for the heart. When one sleepwalked, when the mare pressed their chest, when the church bell jerked them awake, they knew they were small, fragile. They could not imagine passing the night alone. They needed community, right, and God. Thus, sleep in the Middle Ages was not wholly private, it was public action. Someone must shake the shoulder. Pray, read the Psalms. There must be a candle, a bell, a single song raised in the chapel. For if you sleep alone without prayer, you may not wake. Picture a soldier home from war, lying on a straw bed nightcap, on dozing when the owl cries from the henhouse. He turns and sees eyes gleaming in the dark, not an animal's, perhaps the soul of a dead comrade. He tries to say the name, but no sound comes. From outside, the night bell carries like a summons. "Man, will you stay or go?" He bolts up, kneels, lights a candle, whispers the prayer at dawn. He says, "I saw a halo." Then remember nothing until morning bled through the door. The village writes it down not as a private tale but a marker for all to remember the night can kill a soul before it kills a body. At times between fear and faith they began to sing Memento Mori. Remember that each sleep could be a farewell. They wrote, "In omnibus operibus tuis memorare novissima tua et in aeternum non peccabis." In all your works, remember your end and you will never sin. They accepted that night was a trial and sleep a dangerous, holy journey. Nor were only commoners tested, monks, nobles, and merchants faced the night too. An abbot wrote in his diary, "At night I hear the enemy outside the gate, but I am not afraid. Fear is when the enemy comes from within one's own bed. A noble confessed, I hang a cross above the bed, for they say, devils come through the keyhole. I set my shoes beneath the pillow laces trailing, so when the mare creeps in, the cords will snare it." These were not mere superstitions, they were the survival grammar of those who lived before the dark. And when the sun tilted and the first cock crowed, they opened their eyes in the misted light. They breathed out because they had crossed the night, but they knew the night had not entirely crossed out of them. It remained under the bed in the room's corner in breath and heartbeat. The bell still tolled in memory. The ghost might return. Sleepwalking might take the solitary sleeper. They knew the world does not only sleep, it keeps watch. If we return to the modern age, switch on the lamp, shut the door, set a phone by the pillow, and sleep alone in silence, we think we have conquered the night. In truth, perhaps we have fled only part of it, while the other part remains the part medieval people called the vigil between two sleeps, the part where darkness looks back at us and says, "Human, who will keep watch over you?" Sleep becomes perilous, not because we sleep, but because we sleep unaware that night also lies in wait. We do not see grace, yet we need it. We do not hear the bell, yet we need it to ring. We do not fear ghosts, yet the dark still sees us. So each time you close your eyes, think of night as companion and as trial. If you wake between two sleeps, do not panic, that may be the hour of the soul. If a bell tolls somewhere in your dream, do not be vexed, that is the reminder of the road just crossed. If a shadow flickers past the window, do not fear. That is only the portion of darkness required so that light can be seen. Night was once the province of the soul, where medieval people passed with nightcaps, straw beds, psalms, and the faith that if morning came, they would still be here. And us, we are modern. We keep the lights on, we have cortisol, Bluetooth, and Netflix. But do we still hear the bell in our sleep? When our eyes close, does te lucis ante terminum still rise within the heart? And if one night you wake with heart racing and trembling hands, remember you are not insomniac, you are stepping into an echo of history. Is sleep a hazard? Not only, it is a bridge between body and soul, between person and person, between humankind and God. When the darkness learns to look back at us, that is when we learn to look back at ourselves. When the first light of oil lamps and mechanical clocks began to pierce humanity's night darkness, was not erased, only changed in shape. From the damp thatched roofs of medieval peasant houses, where people slept in 2 segments and woke at midnight to pray and keep watch to Roman palaces, to the sun-washed expanse of Washington's Mall. The journey has been a chain of awakenings from invisible fear to the display of power to a shared human dream. 1. Salem. When the night of the 17th century became a trial of humanity. In the English colonies of North America in 1692, a small village in Massachusetts did something history would never forget. It turned darkness into a courtroom. Salem is not merely a story about witches. It is the story of how a community placed under prolonged pressure can turn fear into law, whispers into evidence, and broken dreams of the night into sentences suspended over the necks of others. For medieval people, night was the place where the soul confronted God and the devil. Darkness was feared because of wild animals' disease and invisible temptations. But in Salem, that fear took on a new form, fear organized. No longer the private fear of individuals lying awake in cold rooms, but the fear of an entire community recorded, named, summoned, and judged. Salem was a Puritan community, morally rigid, socially enclosed, and deeply convinced that the world was locked in a constant battle between good and evil. They believed in the devil as a living force, capable of entering everyday life. The hearth fire, the livestock barn, the dreams of children, the grief of a mother who had lost her child. In such a world, every misfortune required an explanation, and the easiest explanation was always that an invisible enemy was at work. During the winter of 1691-1692, as harsh weather, illness, and deprivation closed in, Salem became like a vessel sealed too long under pressure. Then a small spark appeared in the household of Reverend Samuel Parris. Convulsions, incoherent cries, strange behaviors among young girls, behaviors adults looked upon and called demonic possession. But the crucial shift came here once the community agreed that the devil could appear. The next question was no longer, is it real? It became, who summoned him? This was the moment when night began to turn into a court of law. For the signs deemed unnatural often occurred at night. Screams, disturbing dreams, sensations of crushing weight on the chest, panic in the dark. To us, these might appear as stress illness or sleep disorders. But to Salem, they were evidence of spiritual warfare. Then the accusations began. More than 150 people were charged. Nearly 20 were hanged. Many died in cold, unforgiving prisons. And more frightening than the numbers was the mechanism itself. Salem functioned like a machine. It required witnesses. It required testimony. It required images to sustain fear. And because no one could seize the devil with their hands, Salem began to capture him through something far more dangerous: words. Accusations were not based solely on observable actions. They relied on invisible things, sensations, intuitions, dreams, nightmares, voices heard in the night. People were condemned for sighs, for dreams, for testimonies born of imagination, as though night were no longer a place for sleep, but a place for judgment. Within this machine, spectral evidence became the sharpest blade. A person could stand before the court and declare, "I saw her spirit come to choke me in the night." And in the suffocating atmosphere of Salem, such a statement could be enough to turn someone into a criminal. Night at this point was no longer merely darkness. It became a repository for everything that could not be verified. And when a society allows the unverifiable to become law, justice begins to die. There is a powerful image that runs through Salem, the church bell. In the Christian world, bells mark time calling people to prayer, announcing the hours, reminding the community of its place within a sacred order. But in Salem, the bell no longer marked prayer alone. It became a death toll. When the bell rang, not everyone thought it is time for worship. Some thought someone has been arrested. Some thought another trial is beginning. Some thought another name is about to be spoken. And in those nights, the Salem community began to grasp a painful truth. When fear is legalized, justice is destroyed. Fear never demands proof the way reason does. It demands only allegiance. You believe the accusation or you risk being seen as complicit. In a small community, silence itself becomes a crime. Difference becomes a crime. Poverty, eccentricity, personal, grudges, land disputes, jealousy, resentment, all can be poured into the mold of witchcraft as easily as water into a pre-shaped vessel. And so Salem is not merely a case of superstition. It is a lesson in power. When fear has minutes, when fear has seals, when fear has courts. It is no longer an emotion, it becomes an instrument. For medieval people, night was the time when one awoke between two sleeps to pray, to keep watch, or to examine the self. This was the nocturnal routine of life-segmented sleep, a waking interval, a biological rhythm aligned with darkness. But Salem marked a turning point from the private nocturnal practices of individuals to the nighttime trials of society itself. From invisible inner fear to fear that could be named and hanged, Salem stands as a milestone, because it reveals something enduring. When humans no longer fear the night for its physical darkness, they may still fear it for another kind of darkness, the darkness of suspicion, rumor, and collective judgment. And when the Salem storm finally passed, history was left with more than graves. It was left with a question. How many moments in modern life do we still allow fear to become law whispers, to become verdicts, only under more refined forms? Salem reminds us that night may pass, but the mechanisms of fear can be reborn. And when they are reborn, they always begin as a small shiver in the dark before becoming a courtroom. 2. Rome, when power took the night and a woman took the board. Leaving behind North America and its trials born of collective fear, history carries us back to the lands of the Roman Empire, a world where torchlight law and ritual had already pushed back much of physical darkness. Yet in Rome, darkness did not reside beyond the city walls. It lived at the center of power itself. In private negotiations, in personal ambition, in a social order built upon assumptions more durable than marble. This was a different kind of darkness, the darkness of politics, and within it Fulvia emerged. Born around 80-85 BCE, Fulvia entered history at a moment when the Roman Republic was deeply fractured. Institutions that had sustained order for centuries could no longer restrain individual ambition. Generals became politicians. Politicians became warlords. Power was no longer decided openly in the Senate under daylight, but negotiated at night through whispers, letters, promises, and betrayals. In this world, women were expected to be present but not audible. They served as marital bonds, family symbols, guardians of the household, not as political actors. From the beginning, Fulvia rejected that role. Her 3 marriages were not passive alliances. They were political choices. Through her relationships with powerful men, Fulvia did not merely stand beside authority, she participated in it. After the assassination of Julius Caesar, when Rome entered a dangerous vacuum of power, Fulvia did not retreat into silence. She stepped forward. In the political night of Rome, where men held every official title and symbol of authority, Fulvia refused to remain on the margins like a shadow. She spoke, she organized, she mobilized. She appeared within decisive moments at a time when Roman society was wholly unprepared to accept a woman acting in such a capacity. It is this refusal that made Fulvia a figure of controversy for centuries. Ancient historians often described her in language heavy with prejudice, ambitious, aggressive, destabilizing. These portrayals reflect not only Fulvia's actions, but the anxiety of a society witnessing the boundaries of power being crossed. For Fulvia did not merely seek influence. She disrupted a silence long treated as natural. Within Roman order, power was inseparable from masculinity, not because men were inherently more capable, but because the system itself was designed to ensure that they alone were heard. When a woman entered that space and acted as a political subject, history's first response was not analysis but defense, and Fulvia bore the cost of that disruption. Her story reflects another stage of human awakening. Not merely humanity awakening from fear of physical night, but society awakening to its own prejudice. When power belongs to only half of humanity, that society has never truly been awake. In the language of light, Fulvia represents a paradox. She did not embody the gentleness traditionally expected of Roman women. Yet it was precisely this divergence that forced history to ask a deeper question. What is light? Is it merely the preservation of order? Or is it the willingness to allow silenced voices to be heard? Fulvia was not the only one to suffer under that question, but she was among the first to make it impossible to ignore. In the long nights of Roman politics, where decisions of life and death were made beyond public view, Fulvia stood as a reminder that power is not a biological instinct, but a structure that is assigned. And any structure once exposed can be challenged. Her presence compelled Rome to confront an uncomfortable truth: the light of empire did not shine equally on all. That some were forced to remain in darkness, not because they lacked ability, but because they were denied access to the light itself. If Salem reveals what happens when fear is legalized, then Rome, through Fulvia, reveals what happens when prejudice is mistaken for natural order. In both cases, darkness does not arise from night, but from how power is exercised. Fulvia does not need to be idealized to matter. She was not a symbol of moral purity. She was a symbol of presence, of a human being who refused to become silence so that history could remain comfortable. And perhaps that is the most dangerous kind of light of all, not the light of the sun, but the light of a voice that will not go out. In the political darkness of Rome, Fulvia did not erase the night. She made it impossible for the night to remain quiet. 3. The American Dream, when humanity awakened in broad daylight. Compared to the medievals, we once slept in 2 segments, waking at midnight to pray. They feared demons and disease. In Salem, communities feared the demon of power, the night's ferocity. In Rome, with Fulvia, power awakened in the political night. In the modern age, humanity wakes at noon to challenge injustice. That curve is a curve of awakening from the individual to the community, from survival to equity. Today, in air-conditioned bedrooms, under night lights with a phone set to Do Not Disturb, we may think we've conquered the night. But there remains another night, the night of injustice, of prejudice, of monopolized voices. Salem, Rome, the March on Washington all remind us light does not arrive on its own. It needs someone to stand in the dark, lift a torch, and say, "We want light." And sleep now is not merely rest, but the hour we choose to wake for someone else, for community, for the future. Before artificial light, night was the ultimate boundary. It forced us to pause, to stop, to listen. With oil lamps, then gaslight, then electricity, the night was torn open, and the border between day and night began to blur. At first, people wanted merely an extra hour to read, to sew, to talk. Then another to write letters, balance accounts work. When Thomas Edison introduced the electric bulb in 1879, people no longer feared the dark. But, as they defeated night-night, defeated them in another way. Light changed not only cities, but the interior of the body. Artificial light tricks the circadian rhythm, the natural clock that once nudged our ancestors to wake in the midnight watch. Now, the body struggles to tell true day from true night. People sleep straight through, pressing themselves into the 8-hour standard as a duty, while the mind no longer senses the native stillness of dark. The two-phase sleep faded from Europe. Few rose to pray at midnight. Few listened to the wind at the door. Few shared warmth in a common bed. In its place came private rooms, white light alarm clocks, and the endless hiss of traffic outside. People slept less and paradoxically dreamed more. In the 19th century, the industrial world took shape. Factories rose, night shifts appeared, and sleep became something to be scheduled. We no longer slept by nature, but by the shift. Night was no longer an emblem of religion, but of productivity of production of the punch clock. In cramped rooms in London or Manchester, workers collapsed after 14 hours, not to dream, but to endure. In early New York offices, merchants began to boast of only 4 hours sleep a night. "I'll sleep when I'm dead" became the warped badge of a new era. Sleep, once a sacred right, became the blank between 2 workdays. By the 20th century, as electric light reached every room, night was entirely outmatched. We could study, work, play, and be entertained at any hour. Night lost its meaning as rest. It became the day's extension. And then modern society, with tight schedules, elongated work, and phones bright all night, pushed sleep into crisis. People sleep less than ever, and paradoxically are more exhausted than ever. Once sleep was the night's gift. Now it is a luxury of time. Science began to study what our ancestors sensed instinctively. In 1953, Nathaniel Kleitman and Eugene Azarinsky discovered REM sleep rapid eye movement, the stage of dreaming and neural restoration. They saw that in sleep the eyes still move, and in those cycles the brain fires as intensely as in wakefulness. This is the hour of dreams, of memory consolidation, of healing. Lose REM, even if you log the hours and you wake as if you never rested. Modern science calls it the brain's restorative sleep. The medievals may have known it all along. They did not name it, but they lived its rhythm 2-phase nights with a waking watch between an interval of clarity and contemplation, then a return to dreams. Unwittingly, our ancestors kept time with REM. We in our bright world try to recover it with pills and meditation. Today, scientists warn sleep deprivation is a silent global epidemic. Over 30% of adults sleep fewer than 6 hours a night. Sleep is chopped by phone light workload and worry. Young people lie awake for hours before screens while the body clock struggles to turn. We have mastered nature, but stopped listening to ourselves. We can light entire cities but cannot switch off the mind before bed. And so, in high-rise apartments with ceaseless traffic and light splashed on the ceiling, some lie wakeful, remembering what they cannot name. Perhaps it is the inherited memory of our ancestors' 2-phase sleep, that midnight interval, in which people once spoke with themselves or with God, the sound of wind, of fire, of another's breath. The true night, without lamps, without screens, without clocks. We have tugged night toward the light, but deep within the body still carries the legacy of darkness. Part of the soul still longs for that small stillness between 2 sleeps, still remembers the shared breathing beneath a single roof. Now, night shift workers, dawn, writers, students bent over screens. We all live in an age where sleep has become an act of courage. The courage to switch the world off, not to answer, to let go. Perhaps, after centuries, we are relearning an old lesson. sleep is not a waste of time, but the deepest part of life. Science confirms what medieval people once felt in darkness. The mind is cleared, the body renewed, and the soul converses with itself. So, if you lie awake tonight, do not be alarmed. Remember, sleep is not a duty, but a short pilgrimage back to what we are. Let the electric light dim, let the breath slow, let the mind drift toward where the old ones lived. Where a candle gutters, someone still wears a nightcap, and the whole world lies quiet in one another's warmth. Then you will see the night never vanished. It only waits for us to turn off the light so it can sleep again with humanity. From the cold medieval nights to the bright dawn of human history, I've come to realize that no matter the age, human beings have always sought the same thing: faith in awakening. From those who slept upon straw to those who stood up in the public square, all have proven one. Truth, darkness is never truly won, so long as a single candle still burns within the human heart. If this story made you pause and reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What do you think helps humanity overcome fear, faith, knowledge, or compassion? I truly want to read your perspective. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next journeys where history and humanity meet through extraordinary stories. If there's a topic you'd like me to explore next, a civilization, an era, or a person who lit their own light in the dark, leave your suggestion below. The next story might begin with you.